don't even get me started on the rest of your body, okay? They finally have worked out that right now, there are 10 times as many life forms in your body as there are cells. Now, do you know how many cells you have? You have 100 trillion cells. It's a lot of cells, okay? You started with 1, and then 2, and 4, and 7, but now you have 100 trillion. There's 10 times as many life forms, which means, don't even get me started, it's 10 times. It's 100 trillion cells of things. Now, that means that the human body is a collection of life that decides to hold itself together. And Baha'u'llah says, regard the world as a human body, so now human beings become the little microbes of the big life form. You see? They're all of that. Now, the interesting thing is that you have to be concerned about the future of all three. We must be concerned with the future of our body. We do that pretty well. We must be concerned with our soul. Perhaps we don't do that as well as we should. But we also must be concerned with the future of this thing called civilization or humanity. And Baha'is must carry all three in mind. Now, all three grow exactly the same way. All three grow the same way. They all have a period of incubation, followed by a much longer period of growth and maturity. They all three have the same. So let's analyze this very carefully. The human body has a period of incubation of 9 months, approximately 9 months, in the womb. It's a completely different world. It has all kinds of different things. It's very circumscribed, a particularly small world. It lives there for 9 months, and then it comes out. And when it comes out, the world is infinitely larger and more glorious and more opportunities. But it was very important that it had that 9-month period. Who can tell me what the ratio is of 9 months to about, say, 80 years? Who can tell me how much it is? Or 70 years? It's about
1 to 70.
Yeah, it's actually a little more. Yeah, 1 to 70, 1 to 75, 1 to 80, depending. But in other words, it's 80, at least 80, 85 times more than that period of time. And we're told that the human soul is exactly the same, but now this life of 80 years is the womb. And when you go to the next world, that's the larger next world. You see, and this is in the Baha'i writings. Adib Taherzadeh gave a beautiful talk for 1 hour just on this concept that the spiritual life is a mirror of the physical life. This physical world is like the womb. And Baha'u'llah says this in the Gleanings. He says that this is the womb. So we know how spectacular birth is. Like, how many of you remember your birth date? We don't remember it, but you know what it is, right? But there was a very important point, because you went from one place to another. Now, Abdu'l-Baha says that human life civilization also has the same pattern. It has a certain period in which it grows and develops, and then a certain turning point occurs, and then it grows and develops. And he calls this a life cycle. A life cycle. We're getting now to the divine plan pretty soon, because a life cycle, Abdu'l-Baha says, goes back 6,000 years, and then goes forward 500,000 years. And this is a very important point, because, let me read this. Abdu'l-Baha says, a universal cycle in the world of existence signifies a long duration of time and innumerable and incalculable periods and epochs. In such a cycle, manifestations appear with splendor in the realm of the visible, until a great and supreme manifestation makes the world the center of his radiance. His appearance causes the world to attain maturity, and the extension of his cycle is very great. Afterwards, other manifestations will arise. So he's saying that humanity goes through a period of manifestations, and then a universal one comes. And then that lasts for a very long period of time under the shadow. That turning point is, in other words, human civilization has 2 cycles. It has 2 periods. And it so happens that he says the first one is 6,000 years, and the other one is at least 500,000 years. He says at least, so I don't know if it's exactly. So 506,000 years at a minimum is the life cycle that we live in. And so before we understand the 5-year plan, we have to understand the 500,000-year plan. Okay, we have to understand that. Now, Baha'u'llah says a very interesting thing. he talks about this day and age because it so happens, Abdu'l-Baha says, that Baha'u'llah is the universal manifestation. It's the equivalent of the birth, of the body. Now, can anybody work out what is the ratio between 6,000 years to 506,000 years? What is the ratio? Type it out in the computer and you'll work it out. It's about 80, 85 to 1. It's almost the same ratio as the womb is to physical life. Isn't that interesting? So when Baha'u'llah said, regard the world as a human body, it even resembles the human body in this way. Isn't that's fascinating? And so if you think about birth and how exciting that is, how much is available to the human being when it passes through the birth canal and suddenly is born. All the things that it can do post-birth compared to what it can do. That's what we are in civilization now. And Baha'u'llah says an interesting thing about this day and age that you live in right now. I'm going to read this to you. He says, when the victory arriveth, every man shall profess himself as believer and shall hasten to the shelter of God's faith. Happy are they who in the days of world-encompassing trials have stood fast in the cause and refused to swerve from its truth. Now what is he saying here? He's saying that a time will come when everybody will profess belief in this cause, when the victory arrives. I don't know when that will be, maybe 100 years, 50 years, I don't know, but it'll come, because he's predicting it will come. He says, when that comes, everybody's going to profess belief. But happy are those who in this day believe. Now, this quotation that the House of Justice read that I said at the very beginning, there was a part of it that they didn't cite, but I found it in believing. Baha'u'llah said that the call of God, the book of God is wide open, he's making the call, but no more than a mere handful have responded. And that's who Baha'u'llah is talking about. He's talking about this mere handful that are responding in this day. What percentage of the world is this mere handful right now? If there's 7 billion people, and there's 6 million Baha'is approximately, what percentage is that? It's less than 1/10 of 1%. In other words, 99.9% of the world today are not like that. And Baha'u'llah says, when the victory arriveth, all that 99.9% will proclaim, but happy are this 1/10 of 1%. So when I read this statement of Baha'u'llah, it reminded me of the old fairy tale where the woman kisses the frog and he turns into a prince. Do you know this fairy tale? Do you have it in Singapore? She kisses the frog and he turns into a prince. Okay. Now, the important thing to remember here is that when she's a prince, all the women would kiss the frog. Oh, the prince. All women would kiss the prince, because most women will kiss the prince. Okay? How many of you women would kiss the prince? Okay, well, you don't have to admit it. You wouldn't. But to be able to see the inner prince in the frog has very special power. To see there's an inner prince. Baha'u'llah is the Prince of Peace. He's the prince. But to see it when he's a frog and kiss it, this is a very spiritual concept. Wouldn't you agree? So when I read this passage of Baha'u'llah, I kind of thought, well, we Baha'is, we're the frog kissers of God. We're kissing him. In the future, they're all going to kiss him. That's what Baha'u'llah says. But we're kissing him when most people don't recognize him. Isn't that interesting? And Abdu'l-Baha talked about this day and age. He said, centuries, nay, ages must pass away, ere the day star of truth shineth again in its midsummer splendor, or appeareth once more in the radiance of its vernal glory. How thankful must we be for having been made in this day the recipients of so overwhelming a favor. Would that we had 10,000 lives, that we might lay them down in thanksgiving for so rare a privilege, so high an attainment. Now, I tried to work out, I'm going to just say this and then we'll take a break, because we're getting off that. I tried to think, what are the odds that you and I would get to live in this day and age? You know, a 506,000 year period and the greatest turning point. Shoghi Effendi said, this revelation is unprecedented in the past, nor will future generations witness its like. So there's only one time in 506,000 years that we have a universal manifestation. Then there's this small period where only 1/10 of 1% get to kiss the frog. What are the odds that we get to be those people in all of human history? First of all, let's analyze this very carefully. We are told by science that not every soul that's created gets to live in this world. Okay, when a soul is conceived, only about half of them even get implanted into the womb. So if you go to the next world, there's more than twice as many souls there that ever lived in this life. Okay? They say that when you go to the next world, you'll find that you have brothers and sisters and children that you didn't have. That was it, said that you did have that you didn't know it. That's what they say. Just because half of them don't get implanted in the womb. Then of those that get implanted in the womb, they say about 50% don't make it even into this world because of infant mortality, abortion, and all kinds of other conditions. So less than a quarter of all souls even get to live even for one day in this world. So just to live in this world, you won the lottery. Just think about that. But what are the odds of getting to live in this world and live in this world in this day and age? What are the odds of that? You want to calculate that? Okay, I looked Wikipedia and stuff, and I found that for 6,000 years, they think approximately 108 billion people lived. Okay? So that's a lot of people. So you could have lived at any time in those last 108 billion years, and you get to live here. What are the odds that you would get to do that? I calculated, but it was quite big. Then I said, okay, well, how about all the people that are going to live for the next 500,000 years? So I typed that in using an algorithm for population growth. Typed it into the computer, and it said, cannot compute. The number too large, okay, because of population growth and so on. I tried very sophisticated scientific calculators, and none of them could do it. Or it was a number, with an E and then like 55. It's something which the zeros go forever. So I realized that to live in this day and age, you are a fraction of a fraction. Just to live in this day and age, you are a fraction. But what are the odds of all this fact that you get to live in this day and age? And if you went to the next world, which you will, take my word for it, you're going to go to the next world, and they say, when did you live? Someone says the Roman Empire, someone says here, someone says here. And I say, well, I lived in this period between the manifestation, the universal manifestation of God, and the victory arriving. That small period of time, and all the 5 minutes, they say, my gosh, what was it like to live in that and not recognize? He says, no, actually, I was one of the 1/10 of the 1% that recognized. In other words, now I'm a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. What are the odds that we would get to do that? Does that make any sense? We would get to do that. And so, we really won the lottery. Do any of you do you have lotteries in this country? Do they have them? Okay, they win big money? Do you know that most lotteries have a time period in which you can redeem your ticket? And every now and then in America we read in the news that someone found that they had a winning ticket but the time period was gone because they didn't redeem the ticket in time. Have you ever read those? They have it here? They have it. What if you went to your drawer, opened, and you found a lottery ticket and you looked it up and it was a winning ticket worth millions of dollars and the time was expired? How would you feel? That would be even worse than never winning it. Don't you think? To have given it and not redeemed it is worse than have never been given it. And I hope that's not how we feel when we go to the next world. Because when we go to the next world, we're going to realize we were given a huge lottery ticket. And Baha'u'llah says, take heed lest ye forfeit so inestimable bounty. So somehow we are chosen to be part of the greatest transformation in the history of humankind for 506,000 years. And this is where the divine plan is going to come in. So it's just basically an introduction based on the Hazrat message. I'm going to take a break now. We'll come back in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Some refreshment, maybe you can just